thank you for all of you coming along tonight. My name is John Haston. I am a member of the Grangemouth SNP branch. I stood for election in the council elections. I was the last man standing on the wrong side of it, so I didn't get elected, unfortunately. But that's me. I'm a new dad 3 weeks ago, so yay! So, a couple of housekeeping. The fire exits are all displayed. Should the fire alarm go off? There shouldn't be. We're all given question cards as you came into the hall this evening. If you have a question card, if you want to pass them along to the end of the aisles, someone will then collect it and then pass them down to myself, and then we'll ask them. There will still be the opportunity for yourselves to ask questions at the end if anything does come up during the speeches this evening. There's a donation bucket as well over on that table over there where Martyn's just holding it up. This is for the Grangemouth branch SNP, just so that it can fund our independence campaign. Introductions. To my left here, we have Mike Russell. Mike Russell is SNP President, former Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, Europe and External Affairs, and is now Political Director at the SNP's Independence Unit. Natalie from SSP was unable to be here this evening. However, we have in our place Colin Fox, who is spokesperson along with Natalie for the SSP. The SSP played a valuable role in the 2014 campaign, and we look forward to continued cross-party working again in this campaign. And Dr. Tim Rideout, convener of the Scottish Currency Group and a pro-Indie economist. Tim and his group have recently published The Road to the Scottish Currency Report. And Tim is who we're starting with for our first speech this evening. Tim.
Well, if you're pro-independence, I'm sure you know of the Scottish Currency Group. But if you haven't joined us on Facebook, then do sign up. With about 3,200 members now, and growing all the time. And we also have the Scottish Reserve Bank website, so reservebank.scot, if you want to find more information. And there's a YouTube channel, Tim Rideout, where you can get the normal speech about currency, which will go into much more detail than I can manage in 10 minutes. And I'm going to talk about something slightly different anyway. But if you want an explanation about how the currency will probably work, then just see the YouTube channel. Okay, well, we're going to go to a fairly short time, so I thought what I would just do today. Firstly, the only option, in our opinion, for an independent Scotland is to do what the rest of the world does and have its own currency. And I'm afraid that the sterlingisation idea is a complete non-starter that just doesn't work for anything other than a few months. The reason for that is very simple. Well, there's a number of reasons. Firstly, if you make a payment from, say, Santander to Barclays, that payment gets there via the Bank of England's payment system. So, while it's true that the UK cannot stop Scotland from using pound notes and coins, the Bank of England can certainly switch off the payment system if they chose to do so. And that would just leave us with all digital transactions frozen, no money coming out of cash machines and things like that. So the only way sterlingisation works is if you have a de facto currency union, which means you need to have the Bank of England's agreement and the London government's agreement, and they've already said quite clearly that they don't accept that as an option. So, and the other reason for not trying to go down the sterlingisation road is that it would mean we would have to borrow on the international markets to finance the Scottish government. It is going to have a deficit after we become independent. There's nothing wrong about that. It's simply going to need that in order to build the new ministries, employ 30,000 or so new civil servants to run them, and all of the sort of costs of starting up the new country. And if you have to go and borrow that internationally, it's going to be very problematic. And you would need to increase our exports, reduce the import, in order to generate a balance payment surplus to cover the interest payments and so forth. So it would be very difficult for the government to do that in over a period of years. We would probably have a sort of semi-permanent financial crisis. So what we need to do, and what we have set out in this report, which we sent so far, it's gone to all the MSPs and MPs and senior civil servants, is to ensure that we prepare for a new currency. Now, we've been very clear to put in this proposal here that it's for the government of the newly independent Scotland to decide on the exact timings. Nobody can say now what exact plan there's going to be 3 or 4 years in the future. So, although I've handed out leaflets which give you an example of a timetable, that is just an example. So, the important thing is that the independence, that we are prepared to have a new currency. That means we have to set up the central bank, we need to set up a Scottish payment system, we need to get banknotes and coins designed and manufactured, and all of that needs to be done so that the post-independence government has the option of introducing the currency when it feels it's appropriate to do so. If we don't do the preparations, then that government would be trapped, and it would, if, as I predict, sterlingisation was to break down, you're in the Slovakian situation of the emergency introduction of a currency which we haven't prepared for. And obviously we do not want to get ourselves into that position. So, as I said, the critical thing is to make the preparations. We've already done some of the preparatory work in the Scottish Currency Group. I have a staffing plan for the bank. I have a functional design for it. There's more that can be done before the independence referendum. Probably a year's worth of work could be done now. Doesn't need very many people, just a couple of experts. And it's going to take about 3 years after the independence vote to complete the setup of the Scottish Reserve Bank. The whole process about 4 years. But when that's done, we're then ready to introduce a currency, as and when the government should decide that that's what they need to do. So there are, in fact, 2 very relevant examples of countries which have done this. And I used to live in South Africa. 2 of South Africa's neighbours, so Botswana, replaced the South African rand as its currency with a new pula in 1976. And then more recently, Namibia replaced the South African rand with the Namibian dollar in 1992. Neither of those countries had any particular trouble about doing it. And if you look at the history section of the Bank of Botswana website, you will see that they are explicit. As what I've always said in the currency group, you do not need to worry about your foreign reserves because the old currency becomes your new foreign reserves. The history of the Bank of Botswana says that the rands which were handed in were the first foreign reserves of the Botswanan government. The same thing happens with us, that the sterling that we change into Scottish pounds becomes the foreign exchange reserves of the Scottish Reserve Bank. So, as I said, there are examples of 2 countries which have done exactly what we did and very successfully. And Botswana, in fact, has recently overtaken South Africa in terms of GDP per capita. They have a $2 billion sovereign wealth fund for the population, which is about 2 million. So I'm sure there'll be lots of opportunity for you to ask questions. And the last thing I'll just say is we have a new resolution on currency, which just tidies up the April 2019 resolution that was adopted at the SNP conference, and it expands on the SNP policy adopted then was that we'd have our own currency as soon as practicable after independence. The new resolution tidies up a little bit and makes it a little bit more explicit, and I would urge people to support that if you're in the SNP. You can find the details on the in the Facebook page of the Scottish Currency Group. Okay, and there are a couple of copies of this report available to buy, along with our independence maps at the end.
Thank you, Tim. I have got a couple of questions here, but what we're going to do is we're going to wait until all are spoken and then ask questions right at the end. Our next speaker this evening is Colin Fox from the SSP. I'll just pass the microphone over.
Thank you very much, John. I hope you don't mind if I stand. It's such a high ceiling. I thought I'd try and reach for the stars. I wanted to thank John and Martyn for the kind invitation to join you to outline the Scottish Socialist Party's case for independence. And I wanted to ensure on behalf of us all here, thank you all for coming to the meeting. It's nice to see so many of the yes faces, the veterans of 2014 that we've met before at such an important time as this. The Scottish Socialist Party, I suppose it's my job to reiterate that the Scottish Socialist Party is proud to be part of the independence movement. We're proud of the part we've played in it in the past. We like to believe that our role in the independence movement is constructive and part of a team that seeks the same prize, and that's a very, very attractive prize, independence for Scotland in our lifetime. The Scottish Socialist Party has been in favour of an independent socialist Scotland for 25 years. I say that because earlier on Mike was telling me that he stood in an election 40 years ago. So 25 years is nothing at all. So we've supported independence for 25 years. I realise there's people in this hall who have supported independence for 40 years, 50 years, and good luck to you. Well done for that. We want an independent socialist Scotland. We want a modern democratic republic. I feel compelled to say that after enduring, that's the word I choose, enduring the Platinum Jubilee, which I didn't enjoy much. There was no street party in my street. I'm for a republic. I think we're in favour of a modern democratic republic because this is the 21st century and no the 14th century. So we're for an independent socialist Scotland as part of a modern democratic republic. And the tradition that I support independence in can be traced back 100 years ago to Grangemouth and places like it, when James Connolly and John Maclean were advocating independence in 1916 and even before the First World War, an independent socialist Scotland, in the case of both those gentlemen, a workers' republic for Scotland 100 years ago. And I like to think that's part of the tradition I bring to this meeting, that the Scottish Socialist Party brings to the team that's part of the Yes movement in Scotland in 2022. We're democratic socialists. I don't believe Scots are any better than anybody else, but I'm damned if we're considered inferior to anybody else either. We're as capable of running our country as anybody else in the world, and we insist on having the opportunity to do it. That's not a chauvinist thing to say, that's what equality means in the world. We simply want the same right that everybody else takes for granted, the opportunity to run our country as we see fit. If we get it right, we'll have a party. If we get it wrong, well, it'll be our mistake and nobody else's, and we'll take responsibility for that. But for me, I'm here to say to you that independence for me is about change. Independence is about transformational change. It's not about keeping things as they are. I'm not here to say independence is about keeping things as they are. Independence for me means there's no more fuel poverty in this country. In an energy-rich country like ours, we don't suffer fuel poverty anymore. Independence is about meaning there's no child poverty for places like Glasgow and Dundee, where a third of the children go to bed at night with a hungry belly. I'm here to say that independence is about no more economic exploitation by the rich of the poor. Will we bring that to an end? Maybe I'll put this microphone down and just shout, should I? Because that's too irritating even for me. So I'm here to say that independence is not about keeping things as they are. For me, it's not about keeping the pound, keeping the Queen, keeping Trident, remaining in NATO, maintaining the same corporate exploitation that we see at INEOS and so many other places. Independence is about changing all that. And I believe that message is powerful. And I wanted to use the opportunity this platform tonight gives me to send a message to the First Minister to say that our message tonight in Grangemouth is positive and clear. And we're sending a message to the First Minister that there is a majority for independence out there, provided we make it about change, provided that we make it about bringing to an end the cost of living crisis that people in this country are principally concerned about. Eddie and Michael, my colleagues, Michael will tell you, when I'm not here in Grangemouth, I'm usually at Princess Street in Edinburgh between 12 and 2 every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday and Saturday. That's where my surgery is. So if you want to see me, you're welcome to come and see me then. And today we're campaigning to eradicate fuel poverty, because there's 1 million people in Scotland don't have the money today to pay the gas and electricity bills that they need. And this is June, and they look down the line and they're told there's another £900 increase coming in October, and another £300 or £400 after that in January. And they're worried about it, they're concerned about it. And I have to say, that's at the centre of the debate on independence. It's not irrelevant to the debate on independence. It's principally what it's about assuring people that in our energy-rich country like ours, we can take it for granted. Nobody in Grangemouth or Falkirk or Motherwell or Edinburgh will have to worry about putting an extra barrier of fire on in the middle of winter. Those kind of concerns belong to the British state, belong to the past. The 3 questions I wanted to put to the meeting, John, I've not written them down in a wee card, but I raise it at all the independence meetings I go to. We've got to answer 3 questions honestly to ourselves, amongst ourselves. 1, why are we behind in the polls? Why are we behind in the polls? If the case is, or the reason for it is that our economic case isn't good enough, what are we going to do to improve it, to get a majority? And 3rd, how are we going to overcome Boris Johnson's resistance that says we can't have a second legally binding referendum? They're the 3 questions I'm sure everybody in this meeting has thought about. It's what everybody in the independence movement's thinking about. And we have to come up with answers. And my answer to it is, I remember, perhaps I don't remember this way back in the day when Mike was a boy, when it was asked at first, but remember in the old days, the independence movement was confronted with the question, they say, Mike, Colin, John, Tim, Scotland's too wee, it's too poor, it's too small to be independent. Now, the unionists on the other side of the argument, they don't argue that anymore, do they? They don't. Gordon Brown doesn't argue that. Boris Johnson doesn't argue that. They don't argue that. They say, of course Scotland's perfectly capable of being independent, standing on its own 2 feet. It's an economically rich country. It's just that you're better off being part of the United Kingdom. You're even better off. And I personally, as I hope you do, I take that as a compliment to our argument, because it means we won the argument that Scotland is perfectly capable of running its own affairs. We are a rich country. This is a rich country. And I have to say, Tim mentioned South Africa. I'm sure you remember, it doesn't seem that long ago when in Cape Town, the authorities in Cape Town were saying they don't have enough water. They don't have enough water for a city of 2 million. And one of the things I reflect on is Scotland has an abundance of water, thank God. But California doesn't have enough water. South Africa doesn't have enough water. The Middle East doesn't have enough water. Water is a precious commodity. And we've got it in abundance. And that's a big plus for Scotland. As is the fact that we're an energy-rich country. As is the fact that we're an educated population. We are good at solving problems. This is the country, remember, 150 years ago, that brought the Enlightenment to the world, the idea that the world could be rationally, scientifically explained. That's part of our tradition, and I'm perfectly confident in the people of Scotland. We've got the ability, the education, the knowledge and the wherewithal. When presented with problems, we know what a problem is, we don't run away from it, and we roll up our sleeves and we come up with answers. That's part of our tradition. And the wealth of Scotland exists in its people and its natural resources. And we have them in abundance, and that's the case for independence economically, that's the case for independence culturally, that's the case for independence socially. We're perfectly capable of recognising the problem we see it, we're perfectly capable, clever enough to be able to solve the problems that we're confronted with when they're in front of us. And I have to say, my final remarks to you, John, is that the independence movement, our job, all of us, is to persuade a majority of working people. We've got to persuade a majority of people in Scotland, the working class majority, that independence is in their best interests. It's in their best interests economically. It's in their best interests politically. We elect the governments that we want. We're not subject to, the colonial general offices. I was in Monday down along with the railway workers who are on strike, as you know. They had a rally on Monday. I don't know if you've ever been there. Perhaps you should go. Go take your phone, take a picture. There's a big office in Edinburgh. Big multi-storey office building, and it's called the British Government's Headquarters in Scotland, and it's got the crest just behind Waverley Station. Honest to God, I thought I should wear a pith helmet. It felt that the Governor-General had come here, the British Government's Headquarters in Scotland, right in the heart of Edinburgh. And in fact, for us, This is about our country being run by our people and our citizens the way that we want it to. And I think if we can secure a majority for independence, if we have a majority for independence, then we'll get a second vote. That's the key to everything. We'll get a second legally binding referendum. If we can turn round to Boris Johnson and say we have a majority, we have a sustained majority, the people of this country want independence, they know what it's about, we've had the argument, we want independence. The trouble we've got just now is we don't have that majority, if we're honest about it. That's the task that every one of us here has to take out to the country as a whole. And I have no problems understanding this is the democratic question. And if we have a democratic majority, we've got an Achilles heel. We've got Boris Johnson by the Achilles heel. Sounds a rather politer way of saying it. But we've got Boris Johnson by the Achilles heel because there's a majority of people in favour of independence. That's the prize. That's the prize that we're all in favour of. I want a second referendum for independence. But more importantly than that, I want to win it. I'm not interested in another one that we lose. I remember 2014. It wasn't the happiest night in my life. And I say that as a socialist who's had many unhappy nights, election night, right? But that was perhaps the most unhappy. I'm not interested in a repeat of 2014. I want to see an independent socialist Scotland. I'm in favour of independence. It's not an end in itself. I'll be honest with you, it's a means to an end. It's a means to an end, and the end is an independent socialist Scotland, a modern democratic republic, a majority of the people, the citizens of this country in favour of it. And I look forward to that day, as I'm sure you do, it arrives. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much for your time.
I'll try this microphone. I think it's just a dodgy cable. That's okay. Thank you, Colin. That was brilliant. Thank you. Our next speaker this evening is Mike Russell.
Thank you. I'm not even going to risk the dodgy microphone. I'm going to do without it if I possibly can. I'm sorry for those people who are watching this elsewhere. I hope my voice will carry. I've never been accused of being quiet, so I think I can be heard. It was good to hear Colin particularly. And tonight is a big night for me because it's the first night that I've come out to speak to a meeting like this in what is an independence campaign. So the only difference I have with Colin is I don't think we're waiting for an independence campaign. This is the independence campaign. We've started again. We've started to make the case. We've started to argue the case. We've started to put the information in the public domain. Next week, the First Minister will talk about how the process goes forward. So we're in it. And we're in it to win it, because Colin's right about that too. We're not in it to have a failed referendum. We're in it to be independent. But what we've got to do is to inspire and excite the people of Scotland. In that first campaign, I was at that stage the member of the Scottish Parliament for Argyll and Bute, which, if you know it, is a huge area. It's got 23 inhabited islands and a big bit of the mainland. And I set myself a task during that campaign that I would speak in every village hall in Argyll and Bute about independence. I think I managed most of them. And it was invigorating. It was exciting. And by the end of that campaign, those village halls were absolutely full, with people who wanted to talk about the future, about the type of Scotland they wanted to live in. And that's the job we have to take on again. That's the job we have to do as political parties, as a Yes movement. We have got to inspire the people of Scotland to envision something, to think about something that's better than what they have. In that first referendum, and I know Colin said I was ancient, but I think my memory is going a bit too, because I want to quote something exactly, and let me get it right. John Adams, the first American vice president, the second American president, talked about American independence in words that really should strike home to all of us here. He said what they were engaged in building those first years of the United States was this: to begin government anew from its foundations and building as we choose. To renew government from its foundations, and Colin was talking about that too, to begin government from its foundations and build as we choose. And the barrier to that, whatever we choose, and I'll come on to that in a moment, whatever we choose, the barrier to do that is not being independent. Scotland, Colin can't get his independent socialist Scotland unless we are independent. We can't get the type of Scotland that would have, for example, for me as former Highlands and Islands MSP, have a fair system of land use. We have one of the most unfair systems of land use in the world. We can't have that because we're not independent. And the only way we can get a vision of Scotland, whatever vision you have, there are some people in the Green Party who have a vision that's different from mine. Mine's not exactly the same as Colin's, so it's a bit closer to it. We can't have any of those things unless we are independent. So we have to go out with people and say to every single person in Scotland, what type of Scotland do you want? What type of Scotland makes you excited? What type of Scotland is the Scotland you want to pass on to your children and to your grandchildren? Not the Scotland we have now, but that Scotland that you want to live in. And then you have to say, you can't get it. You can only get it if you choose independence. And perhaps the last time we didn't say that clearly enough to people. That there was a soft option. There was something, if you remember the vow, there would be some additional powers that would in some sense allow us to make that Scotland. That Scotland can only be made by having independence. The Scotland that you have in your head, you have in your heart, can only be made by having independence. But things have changed since 2014. We are much closer, even in terms of the opinion polls, to getting that type of Scotland. But we have to now think anew about what the case for independence is. Because a number of things have changed. We've all changed during the pandemic, there's no doubt about that. But probably the most important change in terms of what we're contending is a change that Brexit brought about. Some people accuse me of being a bit obsessed by Brexit. I wasted 5 years as the Brexit minister of the Scottish Government negotiating with the UK government. I have to say, some people really do get bad jobs to do. But I went out and I did that, and did it in my opposite number, Michael Gove, unfortunately, and argued that case. But that has allowed a UK government to take part, which is hostile to Scotland, and hostile to the Scottish Parliament, and hostile to the very idea of having a fairer, more equal, more just society. Brexit does lots of other things. It's impoverishing people. It's contributing greatly to the rising cost of living. It is a huge issue, the cost of fuel, for example. The fuel is denominated in dollars, and the weak exchange rate has driven the price of fuel up way beyond those who remember the oil shocks of the 1970s. Brexit has been a financial and economic disaster. But it's also been a disaster in terms of our shared values. We have shared values across Europe, certainly across this island, but across Europe. And those have been put at risk. When I used to go around and speak on Brexit right across the country, some of you will have heard the story before. There was a story I nearly always told about going to a dinner in Berlin and hearing Martyn, the then President of the European Parliament, talk about the experience of his family in the Second World War. And it was very similar, although it was a German family, to the experience of my family. Because in 1939, my father volunteered for the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. And he found himself at the age of 19 on the beach in Dunkirk with a bullet through his leg, not knowing if he would ever die. Can you imagine what it's like to be 19-year-old from the Ducie seaside town of Troon and not knowing whether you'll live or die because you're lying on a beach somewhere and you have no idea what's going to happen? And that didn't happen to me when I was 19. And it didn't happen to my son when he was 19. And the reason it didn't happen was the reason that Martyn Schultz gave for being so passionately pro-European at that dinner. Because the victor nations stretched out their vanquished nations and said, never again. Never again. And if there was only one reason to stay in the EU, it would be to preserve peace and prosperity in Europe. And we see it again today. We see what's happening today in Ukraine. We see the prospect of war in Europe again. And it is solidarity amongst European nations that can prevent that. And for any government to walk away from it, let alone the UK government, which is meant to have some moral responsibility, for any government to walk away from that runs the risk of bringing back the horrors of my father's generation knew. So Brexit has changed things, and we have to tackle with that. We've got to change society. What we need to do is to go out there as individuals, people who want a better Scotland, whatever that Scotland is, because this is going to be a different campaign. This is going to be a campaign of difference, where there will be different visions. And each of us needs to go out there and argue for our change, argue above all for the change, to have independence as the change. Now, I am confident that there will be a referendum next year. I am confident that we're building a campaign. The publications have started. Those of you who are members of the SNP are getting regular mailings from me, amongst others, and that will build. The First Minister is going to take forward the issue of making sure we've got the parliamentary support back. But the most important thing is this. Each one of us has to persuade our friends, our neighbours, and our families that if we want the type of Scotland which is the Scotland we seek, then we will have to persuade every single person to back independence. There is no alternative. I've spent most of my political life on the pursuit of independence. Some of the things in recent years I've seen in the SNP have been distressing because we've not been focused together. Now is the opportunity for all of us to come together, to put aside the differences we have, no matter between party or whatever, and say we are going to win this. Because the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. We get more of the same. We get more of Boris Johnson. We get more of Brexit. And there will be no Scotland to bring back after that. So this is a start. This is the start of the new campaign. It's a great privilege to be at the first of the meetings. Thank you, Martyn, for inviting me. And I kept a little book in 2014 of all the meetings I did. So I'm going to turn over a page of it tonight when I get home. And I'm going to put this place. I'm going to put Grangemouth in as number 1. And then I want to come back when people do vote for independence, and then we can start to talk about that Scotland, the better Scotland, that we all can be. Thank you.
Thank you to Mike and to all our speakers this evening. It's been wonderful. We're now going to move to questions. I've got a few on my table here, so I'm just going to go through them. If there's any more, just pass them along and they'll be passed to me at the front here. We're going to start with money ones. I've got money ones here. Pensions. What's going to happen? That's from Annette Queer.
I think the pensions question can be answered quite simply, that the Scottish Government would take over the UK state pension system lock, stock and barrel as from Independence Day. And there's no problem about doing that. We can even use the GERS report for something useful because in the last year's GERS report, the state pension for people in Scotland cost £8.5 billion, and the national insurance collected in Scotland was £11.5 billion. National insurance also covers statutory sick pay and redundancy pay and things, but you would still have something like 500 million left over to cover an immediate increase in the state pension. So there's no question that the Scottish Government can finance the state pension. And it is already, I believe, SNP policy to seek to increase that pension to the European average, which would be about £300 per person per week. So I think if you explain that to people, then that makes, that provides an answer to the pension question, but also makes it attractive as to why you should have an independent Scotland rather than stick in the UK scheme. But there's often another separate issue for people who have their own private pensions, which relate a little bit to the currency. So the Scottish Government would obviously pay any civil service, local authority, Scottish NHS, etc., pensions in the Scottish pound, so that those people don't have any exchange rate risks. And the only issue in terms of currency remains for people who have a UK pension. So if you worked for a UK company like British Airways, for example, they're probably going to pay that in sterling. So you might have an exchange risk. But it's only a problem if the Scottish pound goes up. If it goes down, if you're getting a sterling pension, then you actually get more money. If the unionists are all saying, oh, the currency will collapse, well, if you've got a sterling income, that's going to be fantastic because your income will go shooting upwards.
Just a follow-up from that, there's another question that's here as well in the GERS report. So how can we show that the GERS figures are a Westminster concept? How do we show that GERS does not show an independent Scotland?
Well, I think the GERS stuff was designed by Ian Lang when he was the Secretary of State for Scotland, and the objective was to show Scotland in the worst possible light. So, for example, it lumps in all of the costs, so we get allocated a share of maintaining Buckingham Palace and building HS2 and stuff like that, which are not going to benefit us at all, but they make the figures for the expenditure by Scotland look higher, and they then leave out things which would boost income. So, we're financing 8% of the civil service in London, supposedly, but those people are paying national insurance and income tax. That's not credited to Scotland. So that makes your revenues look less, because if we were independent, all of those thousands of jobs, 30,000 jobs I estimate, would be in Scotland, and we would be collecting the tax revenues from those people. So the whole setup of GERS is designed to come up with a picture that looks bad. And it does itself say that it is Scotland in its current position as a part of the UK. When we're independent, the figures will be completely different.
Thank you. Does Mike or Colin have anything to add?
Well, I think one important thing in this is common sense. I got an email today from the Commissioner for Standards telling me that a complaint against me had been set aside, and the complaint is one of many, I hope all for the same reason, which is that I asserted and have asserted constantly that Scotland is not poor and that Scotland pays its way. But this is such an offensive thing to some unionists that they make official complaints about it to the Commissioner for Standards. I mean, it's ridiculous and stupid, but the common sense view is this. Right across Europe, we would not be the smallest country in the European Union by far. I think there are 11 countries that are smaller. All of them manage to survive. I mean, Malta manages to survive, which is, I think, if I remember correctly, in terms of population, the size of Glasgow. What would mean that Scotland, with all those resources, with wind and wave power, with oil, with officially the best educated population in Europe, and that's an OECD figure, and I speak as former education secretary, why would we not be able to survive? I mean, we would have to be perpetually drunk not to be able to survive. So you need to actually use, some people may be, but, most people are not. And what you have to say to people is, that's just stupid. I've moved on quite a lot from 2014, where, we had earnest discussions based on a 600-page white paper, which was great, but we had those earnest discussions, and in the end, all that the criticisms were designed to do was to keep chipping away at what people who believed in independence said. I don't mind, as we publish material, we put that out there and we argue the case. But I also want to say to people who are asking us questions, hang on a minute, think about it by common sense. It's a choice. You can choose not to be independent, and I disagree with that argument, but you can do so, or you can choose to be independent. But if you choose to be independent, you will be pretty much like most other small countries, and actually a lot better off than some. In fact, most. Just have to look across the Irish Sea to look at Ireland and how well Ireland does. They used to say that Ireland, the difference between Ireland and Scotland was Scotland had done so little with so much, and Ireland had done so much with so little. And actually there's a lot of truth in that. And what we need to go out there is confidently into the world and to say, no, we can do it, we can make it, and if we do that, then we will have, as I keep saying, the Scotland that we seek to have.
Can I just say, a couple of things strike me. I don't disagree with Tim or Mike on the thrust of what they're saying, but I reflect in 2014, and it seems to be clear from the figures that the demographic, that portion of the society of Scotland that were the least persuaded of the case for independence, were senior citizens. And I think we reflect on that now and say the unionist side played on their fears that their pension wasn't secure. And I look back and I remember the arguments at the time saying, George Osborne, remember him? David Cameron. It says they're promising you that you'll have to work longer, pay in more, and you'll have to expect less when you retire. That's what they were offering you. And we reflect now and say we didn't do well enough, but we have to convince people who are retired, that dignity in retirement is a value that Scotland wants to sustain and make sure we have it. And this is understandably right across the Western world. I looked at, I'm sure you did if you had enough time last Sunday, the French elections, where Jean-Luc Mélenchon promised to sustain a retirement age in France at 62. 62. And Macron was saying you're going to have to work to 67. And Mélenchon, he didn't win the election, but he got 167 seats on the basis of people were saying, I want a guarantee, I want an independent Scotland, in effect they're saying, to guarantee that I have a quality of retirement that I've earned, that I've worked for, that I'm entitled to. I've worked for 44 years at any house in Grangemouth. I'm entitled to a retirement for something I work for. It's my money. That's the whole thing about a pension. A pension is deferred wages. You're not getting any kind of favours here. Working people work hard for their pension. I think there's some tragedy. Mike talked about his family. I'm sure everybody here can point to somebody in their family, whether they're a teacher or a firefighter or they worked at Grangemouth or elsewhere, who worked for 45 years and dropped dead within 18 months and didn't get any pension that they paid. That's the actuarial tables, that's the risk that you run. And I think this answer for me has always been about the values. I remember my grandparents in Motherwell, how difficult it was as a steel worker when they were retired, and the fear of the poorhouse. They remembered it. They had suffered it as their own family. And we're happy to say in the independence movement, our values are social collective, social solidarity. We're going to protect the youngest and we're going to protect the poorest to the poorhouse. Therefore, we can give guarantees that say you've worked long enough, you're entitled to dignity in retirement, we intend to deliver. And the only thing I was going to add, John, was on the question of the JERS figures and the wider economic picture. I'm happy to learn from my colleagues, friends, and I dare say comrades in the independence movement. I've come round to the understanding, perhaps I didn't have it sufficiently in 2012, that Scotland has to pay its own way. We're going to have to pay our own way. And I stand up to that and I say, fine, yeah, that's there's no free lunches. We're not asking for free lunches. We are saying that an independent Scotland will have to pay its own way. We'll have to grow our economy, we'll have to invest, we'll have to increase productivity, and we'll have to ensure that all those kids in Grangemouth who are leaving school this week get the opportunity to fulfil their potential for them individually and our nation as a whole. And that's a big part of what independence is about, and I'm confident, given that opportunity, they'll fulfil that opportunity and that potential. That's what independence affords us. That's what Westminster disaffords us, if that's even a word. Maybe I should study my English higher.
Thank you for the responses there. I've got one here about jobs, really. So when we get independence, will civil servants be left with the English government, or will they be employed by the new Scottish government? Who wants to answer first?
We'll only leave the ones we don't like with the UK government. No,
Sir Humphrey will get the sack.
Exactly. Yeah. If there's a list. There is no separate Scottish civil service, which may surprise people to know. There is a separate Northern Irish civil service, but there's no separate Scottish civil service. It's still part of the UK civil service. So it was one of the strange anomalies at devolution. There needs to be a separate Scottish civil service, and I'm pretty sure the vast majority of those people who are presently in the Scottish civil service will choose to remain in that. There may be some people who would choose to remain in the UK civil service, and as they will not have that office, except if they choose it as an embassy. I was past that office today. It is extraordinary what they have now sitting in Edinburgh. Then those civil servants will have to choose what they do, and that's absolutely fine. I mean, if they will continue to have a job, there'll be no question of that, but they will have to choose if they decide not to be employed by the Scottish Civil Service. My experience as a minister, over more than a decade, well over a decade, was that we are well served by a very good Scottish Civil Service, and I'm quite sure many of them would be very keen to contribute to building a new Scotland. And there was a real enthusiasm in 2014 amongst the Scottish Civil Service about the prospects of what they were then going to do when Scotland became independent. And there was some tremendous work being done about that. And they were the people who helped, of course, to draw up the white paper, and they are the people who would have gone on then to help to manage the process between a vote for independence and the actual date of independence. So I think it'll be fine for them, and many of them will make a tremendously strong contribution.
Thank you. And do you want to comment?
Well, to just add slightly to that, the Scottish Government is actually very small. It's less than 8,000 staff. And I think the UK Government has something like 25,000 staff in Scotland in things like the Ministry of Defence Wages Office in Glasgow and HMRC and things like that. Countries such as Denmark has about 50,000 civil servants. So I think the Scottish Government is going to have a very large expansion to take it to that sort of level, which is why I said there's going to be another 30,000 odd jobs or so that will be added by setting up the Ministry of Defence, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Finance Ministry and all the sorts of things we haven't really got at the moment. So there's plenty of scope for the UK staff in Scotland to move into those new positions if they want to do so.
Thank you. Colin?
I agree with that. I think the first thing I'd say, civil servants as a general rule, and I hope there are civil servants amongst us, don't get half the credit they're entitled to for the job that they do. They're somehow seen as anonymous. You know, you might have interaction with them at the dole office, you might have interaction when you're looking for your passport, etc. These are men and women who work hard, who are instructed by the government the decisions that we take, and sometimes they're a bit like social workers. They don't get half the credit they're entitled to for the job that they do in the background. I think to the question itself, it seems to me, it might say this is logical. In independent Scotland, we'll have civil servants who are there to support an independent Scotland. It seems to be unlikely we'll have civil servants working for another government in any big numbers in this country, and that's the way it should be. If we're independent, we'll need as many civil servants that are presently skilled in the job that they do to help build our new independent country. Good luck to them.
Okay, thank you. This one from Dougie Bendel. How do we counter and take the narrative away from the mainstream media about Scotland being bad, Scottish Government bad, SNP bad, Indy baddest? From that, who was that?
Well, can I just say, first of all, sometimes the Scottish Government is bad. Sometimes the SNP is bad. You know, sometimes the SSP is bad. Not as often, I would argue, as others, but, you know, I think the issue with the media, they have an agenda. Perhaps let me bring something to the last couple of days. I hope you've been heartened as I have. I've watched the railway workers leader on the television wiping the floor with Tories of all sorts of guises. You know, I was really heartened. The other day I seen, what's his first name, the guy that's the leader? Mick Lynch, just testing you there, of course I knew. But Mick Lynch, he was on Newsnight and he called the Tory guy a liar 100 times. I was like, great, that's great for me, he can do that all day. A bit boring as television goes, but fine, he's right on the money. I think he's an illustration of somebody who knows his brief, he knows the case that he's trying to make, and he knows that essentially the railway workers, it's not about pay. This is about the threat of 20,000 railway men and women being made compulsorily redundant by 13 train operators in Network Rail. And he, quite rightly, one of those few trade union leaders, absolutely determined that he won't give an inch. Those jobs are important. We rely on those jobs, and he's done a first-class job. So that's been a heartening experience, I think, watching that dispute, where you see the BBC and what's that bunch of monkeys, GB News. You know, I don't watch it, I've never seen it, but it comes up on my Twitter because some outrageous question I've asked Mick Lynch or something like that, right? But, you know, that's been really encouraging, because see, when we've got representatives of the independence movement on the television, myself, Mike, Tim and others, and when you know your brief and you know the question the journalist is going to ask in advance, and you're already ready, prepared for them, and wiping the floor with them, that fills us all with a joy, doesn't it? That our case is strong, it's powerful, we can predict in advance what Gordon Brown's going to say about the vow and how they never deliver it. So I'm not here to defend the SNP and you wouldn't ask me to. I'm not here to defend the Scottish Government and you wouldn't ask me to. But we are here collectively to point to the independence case and say, this is a good case, this is a case that deserves people's support, and we're confident that we can get the case over and we can win a majority in due course?
I think you're right to draw attention to what Mick Lynch has been doing. It's a tactic we need to see more of, and it's something that I have done myself in the past. I remember on Sky Television describing Michael Gove as saying that Michael Gove meant to me just being sleek it. And there was a pause, and then the presenter said, "What's sleek it?" So you had to be careful about what you're doing.
You said Michael Gove.
Indeed, but Michael Gove is undoubtedly the most sleek it person I have ever met. I think you've got to distinguish this between the broadcast media, particularly the main broadcast media, and the press. Press are entitled to write what they want, and we're entitled not to read it. You know, and that's the basic exchange that we have. I don't bother myself with reading the endless views of people who know nothing. You know, and there's an endless procession of people who are commentators within the written media, and sometimes now, in radio and elsewhere, who just don't know anything. They don't talk to anybody, they just give you their opinions. Well, fine, they're entitled to opinions, I can't be bothered with them. Broadcasting's a bit different. You know, the BBC has a set of obligations, and it doesn't fulfil them, and it hasn't fulfilled them. And the BBC has become, and I think it was undoubtedly true in 2014, and we didn't recognise it enough. The BBC saw it its duty to defend the state, and that's what it tried to do. And I think we've got to be pretty even stronger than we've been on this, and certainly to say enough is enough, and complain, and make a fuss about it, and go on making a fuss about it. But the reality is, if you think about this, and I'm not going to defend the government because it doesn't need defending from me, good government it is, but it's been re-elected. It was elected in 2007, re-elected in 2011, re-elected in 2016, re-elected in 2021. Without any media support except now the National, and before that the Sunday Herald. So you've got to ask yourself, what is the influence of this supposed media that can demand everything? It is very, very annoying sometimes to read the nonsense, the bollocks that they write. But actually you don't have to read it. You can just say, I can't be bothered with it. And focus on talking to people. Focus on going out there and having conversations about independence. And of course, when you get the opportunity to appear in the media, be very strong, be very powerful about this, and also just dismiss the rest of it. Most of the arguments against it, frankly, and I would be criticised for this in some quarters, are made up. Why would you bother yourself with made-up arguments that are used against you? Just say, sorry, as Mick Lynch said, it's a lie. It's a lie, and we don't respond to lies because it's not worth responding to.
Thank you. Do you want to come in? No, that's fine. When will the referendum bill be put to Holyrood? And if it is challenged in the Supreme Court, what political action will or could the SNP or the Scottish Government take to hold a referendum in 2023?
Two parts to that question. I don't know when it will be in thing. I'm not a member of the Parliament. That is a question for the First Minister working with the government, with the Greens and the SNP. But I constantly say to people, don't allow yourself to be dominated by what might happen from Boris Johnson or from the UK government. Don't say, well, if they do this, then we'll do that. And then if we do that, then they'll do this. Forget it. We have the right to hold a referendum. The people of Scotland want a referendum to be held. We know that to be the case. Let's just do that. I trust the First Minister to get us to that position. And if you got eventually to the stage that it was being stopped solely because the law was stopping it, essentially a law passed by Westminster, then you would have to address that question. But they would love us to spend all our time saying, oh, well, I'm worried they might do such and such. And many people in the independence movement have done that up until now. They've spent their time speculating about what can go wrong. Let's go out and just do the job.
Gentlemen, do you want to answer that at all?
I have no knowledge of when there's going to be a bill.
No, that's fine.
Can I just say, John, Nicholas Sturgeon told me, but I'm not allowed to tell you. That's a lie. Anyway, I think I agree with Mike and Jim. That for us in Grangemouth, the key thing is we've got to persuade people of our case. The rest of it's just flotsam and jetsam. The rest of it is just an Edinburgh Festival show. We need to get a majority. And I have to say, I believe the polls. I used to work for a polling company. After I left the Parliament, I worked for Kantar, I worked for a couple of the polling companies. And actually, I'd say to you, I remember being in Grangemouth, in lots of places in Scotland, you go around the country. I'd shut the door
And I knew the rest of my colleagues in the polling companies used to hate it, chapping the door, because they never knew who was behind the door, and they'd always worry that they were ever going to get an interview. I used to chap the door and they go, "Oh, it's you! I've seen you in the telly. Come in and tell me about the Parliament and all that. It's supposed to do a 20-minute interview, I'd be there for an hour." But, you know, I had the opportunity to speak to a lot of people. The polls are largely scientific. Sure, they get them wrong, statistical sampling being what it is, right? But I believe the polls. By and large, I believe the polls. If you get the same result again and again and again and again, it rules out the ideas that there's so many outliers. And I have to say to you, my belief is we don't have a majority. If we're at 45% support, well, that's good, having 45%. I'm sure my colleagues and those of us who remember 2012, we started with 27%, we got it up to 45. But if at 45, it means there's 55 who don't yet support independence. And actually, that's the key to everything. That's the key to a legal, binding referendum or not. And I believe, I know Nicola not as well as Mike and possibly Tim. I know Nicola Sturgeon. I sat with her in the independence, what do you call it, this Yes Scotland Advisory Board for those 2 years. She's a clever politician. She doesn't believe, how can I say this delicately, sometimes the left has a tendency to put our head in a noose just for effect. We know we're going to lose, we still stand in elections. Nicola's not like that. Nicola Sturgeon, I don't believe Nicola Sturgeon will organise a second referendum if she believes we're going to lose it. And therefore, for her and everybody else, our key consideration is there will be a second referendum for independence, legal and binding, because we put the gun, metaphorically speaking, to Boris Johnson's head and say there's a majority of people in Scotland consistently and sustained who want independence. And he and 600 of his colleagues at MPs at Westminster will have to relent, because that's the force of democracy. People here, I look around the room, and if you forgive me, I would suggest there's quite a number of people here who remember the anti-poll tax campaign and were perhaps active in the anti-poll tax movement in Grangemouth. And remember Thatcher saying, it's the law, you have to pay it. Labour went into the corridors of power and voted for it, all with a heavy heart, etc., but they voted for it. And what killed the poll tax? 16 million people across Britain refused to pay it. That's what killed the poll tax. I bring you the news. It wasn't that speech by Geoffrey Howe. It wasn't that speech by Geoffrey Howe. It was 16 million people refusing to pay it. And it shows there's the majority. And if we can mobilise the majority in Scotland, we'll get a second referendum. And I tell you, my prediction is next September, when Tim's got it in his leaflet and his £5 notes with the Capercaillie on it, etc., if there's not a majority support in the polls for independence, there won't be a second referendum. Nobody's that daft that you're going to just have another one for the sake of having another one. You're going to lose. It's about winning. We have to have a vote that we're going to win. And we have a vote because we know we're going to win it. That's my conviction. And I don't see much attraction in an advisory referendum. I want an advisory referendum. Well, let yourself go. The Edinburgh Festival starts in a month's time. I'm sure they can organise one for you, and it'll have the same impact. We have to do this seriously. We have to do it right. And we have to realise we are taking on the British state. We're taking on the British state. Look what they did to James Connolly. Look what they did in Ireland. Look what they did in India. These are no altar boys, you know. Boris Johnson might look like a buffoon, but behind him is the British state. And that's who we're seeking to defeat. So we need to be as serious in our convictions and our plans as they are in opposition to us. This is deadly serious.
Thank you, Colin. Next question is, sorry, there are some questions that have been answered just in the course of people speaking, so I've just put them to the side. So why do we rarely talk about money that we would get instead of Westminster? For instance, the oil tax, fuel tax, alcohol tax, profits from companies operating but not owned in Scotland, potential wealth. We need to show it. Can anybody answer that question?
Well, it's always been shown in the figures, you know, that have been published about specifically about independence. I mean, the assumption is that that money, part of it is subject to decisions, political decisions. I mean, taxation is a political decision, what you tax and how you tax it. So, you know, that would change depending the nature of the government that you had. But Scotland is more than capable of paying its way, and it has the resources which it can tax in order to do so. So I don't think that's a controversial issue.
Can I just offer one thing? So the scene setter that Nicola published last week had a series of comparators between countries of similar size to Scotland, and there was quite a number of them. The one that jumped out at me was Norway. Norway has a sovereign wealth fund that makes it perhaps the richest country in the world. Maybe Qatar might be wealthier, but Qatar's got its own sovereign wealth fund. And Norway's sovereign wealth fund essentially came from a decision they took in 1964 that the oil and gas discovered in the North Sea belonged to the Norwegian people. And from there on, it was owned by Statoil. It's publicly owned, and all the wealth generated by the oil and gas industry in Norway since 1964 went into the hands of the Norwegian people, and they set up something called a sovereign wealth fund. In 1964, the British sector, because I'm sorry to say it was the British sector, had more oil and gas than Norway, and it was decided that that could belong to BP, Shell, Esso, Chevron, Phillips, etc. And for me, the key conclusion to draw is Scotland should have had and needs to have public ownership of our oil and gas and other resources. The renewables industry that Scotland, I agree with whoever was it said, perhaps you remember who said Scotland could be the Saudi Arabia of renewables. Perhaps it's a name that never speaks its name anymore. But Scotland could be the Saudi Arabia of renewables. But for me, the renewables industry needs to be publicly owned. That's our air, that's our tidal power, that's our resources. They belong to the people of Scotland. And I want to see that money, no giving coppers the taxes that BP pay on their profits, and some years they don't get any profits at all, and we have to give them money. We have to give BP money, one of the richest companies in the world. Bugger that, as my granny used to say. We need to have the oil industry. What's left about another 25 years publicly owned? We should prefer renewables industry publicly owned. I believe in public ownership, and I have to say I believe the people of Scotland believe in public ownership too. They've had their fingers burned by the privatisation of our railways, of our gas, of our electricity, of our airports and everything else. And I believe that's a vote winner for the case for independence. It's patently obvious we will be wealthier. And if we patently obvious that wealth will be shared out in communities like this one in Grangemouth, which needs help as much as any other in this country. And it needs it now.
To be slightly sort of technical about it, if you're looking at the sort of tax revenues, something like VAT, it's impossible to say what VAT collected in Scotland is, because the data is simply not collected at a Scottish level. Marks and Spencers, for example, submit one VAT return which covers the whole of their UK operation. So, trying to work out how much VAT was paid in the Edinburgh Marks and Spencers is impossible. So for a lot of these things, you're only going to find out what the tax revenues are for something like excise duties, VAT, and so on, after we start collecting the data ourselves. But I think there's a more fundamental issue with tax and things like deficits of the government. Firstly, there is no such thing as taxpayers' money. And anyone who creates money, if I start saying this is real money and start passing it off as sterling notes, I would get done for forgery. So creating the money supply for the country is a state monopoly. It cannot be taxpayers' money because they don't create it, the state creates it. And that leads to a second thing, which is that the narrative is the wrong way round. Tax does not fund spending. Spending funds tax. Because since the state creates the money, it creates the money by spending it, and then at the end of the process, after it's circulated around the economy, it takes it back and destroys it via the tax system. So, you need to change your narrative. Stop talking about taxpayer money. That was a 1970s reframing exercise to persuade us that those who have lots of money should have more say. And you need to go back to the old phrasing, which is the public person, public funds, because that's what it is. It's the public's money. And as I say, we need to realise that, as you can see with COVID and the activities of the British government, they spend the money first. They don't ask where it's going to come from. They just tell the Bank of England to write the cheque. In fact, under the 1866 Act of Parliament, the Bank of England is not allowed to refuse a government payment, has to pay it. Nobody's going to ring up the Chancellor and say, I've got your cheques here, and unless you pay in funds by 4 p.m, I shall have to bounce them. So they spend the money, they collect it via tax at the end of the system to balance the books.
We're an hour in, and nobody's mentioned climate or the climate emergency, and I think it's just appropriate to mark that card for a moment. You know, we are going to have to think different thoughts as an independent nation about how we raise money and about how we fund and how we run our economy. And you know, I'm a big enthusiast for the involvement of the Greens in the Scottish Government. I think it is positive on both sides. I think it's positive from the SNP's side because I think it brings that urgent imperative of climate change. And I'm an ex-environment minister. I'm particularly strong on those issues. But also from the SNP point of view to the Greens, it gives the Greens the practical experience in government. And we are going to have to look at different forms of taxation, for example, land value taxation, which is a different form of taxation and which might replace all the dependence we've had on energy taxation, for example. There are issues in renewables. I would love to see public ownership in renewables industries, but we also have to say to ourselves, how quickly could we get there from dependence to independence? And that's an issue, a practical issue that we also need to discuss at some stage. Once we have got people engaged in the issue of independence, we have to discuss some of the practicalities. And one of the practicalities is, how long will that period of transition change? It's usually asked of me in terms of EU membership. How long will it take to become a member of the EU? Well, actually, the effect of rejoining the single market could be almost instantaneous. And certainly that would be the true of becoming a candidate country. But full membership will take a period of time because there's the forms to fill in. You've seen that with Ukraine in recent days. There are issues to be addressed of how you operate within the EU. So I think there's some complicated things in here which we need to think through more carefully. And that's, of course, one of the purposes of the work that the Scottish Government is doing in producing the papers. You know, and thinking of new things and looking at things differently and saying things are different from how they were in 2014. And, for example, the climate emergency is much more pressing. And it will have to be tackled and should be tackled. We've passed Scotland's passed two climate bills, and the emergency has just got worse. I mean, not Scotland's going to solve it on a globally. We now need to think about what more we will have to do, and really have to do, if we're not going to see those effects, not just across the world, but within our own country. I mean, where I live in Argyll, there are whole parts of communities that could be underwater in 25 years. And that's not an idle speculation. That's true. The projections tell you that will happen. So we have to take action of some sort.
Thank you. Next question is from Ray. And with voters flip-flopping between Tories to Labour and Labour to Tory, how are we going to get them to flip-flop to the SNP and the independence campaign?
Well, I think the question is, there's a divide in Scottish politics, the constitutional divide, and it seems to be quite entrenched. Actually, I don't think it's quite as entrenched as people think it is. I've been curiously encouraged in the last week since the paper was published and the campaign started again. The number of people who have spoken to me who are either no to yes people who voted no last time but want to vote this time, or are open to that discussion. So I think perhaps we think of that divide as harsher than it is. There will be some people who will never vote for independence. It is not going to be unanimous. Regrettably, I wish it was, but it's not going to be unanimous, and there are some people who will never do so. We must also think of them, because as change takes place, we need to find a way to engage them and to involve them in the task of building a new Scotland. But for those in the middle, and I think there are more people, as I say, than we think are in the middle, I think that is the type of campaign I've been talking about. Going out and talking to people, drawing people in, being positive, and not getting bogged down in the minutiae either. One of the things that people find difficult is if we get bogged down in the minutiae, then people turn off, and they think, oh no, this is too complicated for me, can't be bothered with this. Let's talk about what people want to see in their own lives, for their families, for their communities. And let's see how we can then say that can happen and show the route to that happening. And I think that does make a difference to people.
Can I just say, I think it's politics. One of the things you learn in politics is very little thing. Virtually nothing is static. Nothing stays the same. Nothing has stayed the same. I mean, we as a movement, independence movement, have probably been reluctant, shy, maybe even reticent to acknowledge that if 12% of people went from no to yes because of the EU referendum and the overall picture stayed the same, it stands to reason 12% must have went the other direction too. And we didn't sufficiently examine or even admit to the fact there was people who used to support yes who went to no. But it illustrates the fact that politics is fluid, there is a fluidity there. Mike's quite right. I remember, and I'm speaking from the left on this occasion, I looked at the experience of what I call Corbyn mania. Corbyn mania was this maniac idea that Jeremy Corbyn was going to become the next British Prime Minister. I thought it was a nonsense, but sometimes you have to sit back and watch people put their hands in the fire. But I watched in Scotland people tell me, I used to support independence, but now all the things we thought we could get via independence, that social democratic Scotland, are now possible through a Corbyn-led Labour government. And I used to say, you're crackers if you think there's going to be a Labour government. You think Ian Murray is going to support Jeremy Corbyn? I mean, I live in Ian Murray's constituency. This is Scotland's only Labour MP. I mention him because he's a bit of a celebrity for that now. But you'll not find anybody in the length and breadth of Britain, possibly the world, who hates Jeremy Corbyn more than Ian Murray. And the right wing of the Labour Party did their level best to stop Jeremy Corbyn getting any credibility or any unity inside the Labour Party. But let's not cry over spilt milk. You know, Corbyn mania is now dead in the water. But there were people in Scotland who thought that they could get the same things that independence would deliver through a Corbyn-led Labour government. And they went in the other direction. I have to say, most of them, and by the way, around about august bodies like the STUC, I know a lot of people in the trade union movement who went in that direction. It came to nothing, it hit the buffers, and they're now moving back to yes. That illustrates the fluidity that's there. And I think I have to say, much more important than that, as a socialist, I take great confidence or optimism from the idea that independent support will grow because of the cost of living crisis. People are dealing with things they've not had to deal with in 30 years. They're worried about their wages, they're worried about how they're going to pay the bills, whether it's gas, whether it's the fact that diesel now costs £2 a litre. My dad worked in Bells Hill in a petrol pump in the 1960s, and he told me how petrol was about 4p a litre. Now it's like £2 a litre. 4p a gallon, whatever it was. So people's great anxieties about the cost of living crisis have every reason to challenge their existing or their previous attitude towards independence. And my view is that that's a big opportunity for the independence movement. That when people's paradigm shift, when there is a preparedness to look at things afresh because their circumstances have changed, and saying, no, to hell with it, I might as well support independence. There might be better prospects for independence than staying with the status quo because of the shift that's gone around them with the cost of living crisis. So I'm like I was saying, I'm optimistic and hopeful and confident that we can see that majority being achieved. But it's down to hard work. Mike's absolutely right. Nobody else is going to persuade people to support independence. That's got to be our job. And it's got to be one that we take seriously, roll up our sleeves and treat with an urgency that perhaps we've not done in the last couple of years.
I'll just add a couple of things. I think there were a number of mistakes in 2014, but two of them were, I think, firstly, to sort of give the impression that independence wasn't going to change anything very much. You know, we just carry on using sterling, carry on having a monarchy and all that sort of thing, and don't worry too much, it's all going to be much as it was. And if that's the case, then what's the point of having independence? So I would go with Colin that, we need to be clear that independence is an opportunity, it's only an opportunity to make radical change in Scotland. What that change is going to be, you can't really say, but it's up to what sort of government is elected after independence and what policies they choose to do. And that would bring me on to what I think was the second mistake, which was to make the independence prospectus, and I read all 400 pages, I think it was, of the white paper in 2014. It came across as a political manifesto. It talks about things like how many hours of childcare there was going to be. That is completely out of place in a discussion of independence, because what has a particular political policy got to do with independence? Nothing, because it depends on what government you have and what they choose to implement. So we need to answer the questions which need to be answered, like, the European Union, the EFTA position, what we think we should aim for, what the border is likely to be with England, which is going to be the same as the border between England and Northern Ireland, that we're going to have our own currency like every other country does, and that we're going to take over the pensions and we're going to try and increase them. But things which are simply political manifesto points like, we're going to introduce a land tax, well, no, that has no place in the campaign. It's an option for the future government.
Thank you. I'm going to take 2 more questions that I've got here and then open it up to the floor, really, just for a couple more questions. Just to draw everything to a close. The question here is probably quite an important one. So if unionists boycott the independence referendum, it could be argued that it isn't valid. And what if unionist councils won't facilitate voting stations?
Well, we're back to the stage, well, if they do this, then we'll do that. And then, let's be confident that the people of Scotland, A, have the right to have a referendum, because they do have the right to have a referendum. Secondly, we'll do all the work we require to prepare for that. And of course, in the background, people will be saying to themselves, let's be prepared for people to throw spanners in the works. But the last thing you want to do is to start to talk about what you would do if somebody threw a spanner in the works, because they'll just find a bigger spanner. That's the reality of that type of debate. So there will be a referendum. It will take place. It will operate to the highest of standards, as it did the last time, and we have the right to that. It's not that we're going to try and persuade people to do it. We have the right to do that, and it will take place. And I certainly have given up speculating on the what ifs. What if a council doesn't do it? You'll find a way to make sure that people vote and they get to vote. And indeed, they'll be more inclined to vote the more people try to stop them to vote.
Gentlemen, would you like to add into that one?
Yeah, I feel obliged really to dissent from what Mike is saying, because I think, Karl Marx famously said, out of conflict comes clarity. So if there's a conflict, we can be clear about what both sides are arguing. And my view is, yes, we have the right to a referendum, but who's going to conduct a referendum you're going to lose? The tactics are important, the strategy is important. The question was about whether the unionists boycott the referendum, and the inference there is the unionists will boycott an advisory referendum because they aren't daft. And they did watch what happened in Catalonia in 2017, where an advisory referendum was conducted with no legal bearing. The turnout was 41%. 80% of those people voted for independence, but it was 40% vote. It was redundant, it was pointless, it was an exercise that backfired. And I know, speaking to Nicola, and I don't know if Michael admitted here, but I know Angus Roberts and other people are not interested in following the Catalonia experiment because it didn't work. It won't work here. Offering your opponents an easy way out to boycott a referendum is mindless. And, I might have criticisms of the SNP and the Scottish Government, but I would not stand here or sit here and say that they are mindless. So my feeling is, if there's not a majority, there won't be a referendum. Why on earth would you have a second referendum you're going to lose? So the majority, we have the right, of course we have the right, but we have the right to exercise it in a way that says we're going to avoid a pratfall. We're the right not to fall down a hole if that's what we see in front of us. So I know Mike's saying what he says, and Mike's got an important position in the SNP, and he'll say what he says, and he's arguing it truthfully. I have to truthfully say, as I see the lie of the land, I don't see there being a second referendum if there's not majority support for it. If there's not a majority in Scotland for a second referendum, it won't happen. If there's not a majority in Scotland for independence, that referendum won't happen either. So it's best to speak openly to one another. That's what partners do. I'm not here to flaffle you. I'm not here to agree with the SNP with some nodding dog that helps the back of your car, etc. I'm here to say our alternative point of view. I think it's worthy of attention. I'm grateful for that attention, and ultimately we'll do what we all agree on.
Thank you. Have you anything to add as well? No. The last question I'm going to take from the list here, there's four we've not got to. It's one on immigration. So at the time of independence, what kind of foreign nationals staying in Scotland will have eligibility to apply for permanent residency?
Well, we've already resolved that in terms of the electoral legislation, which I had responsibility for in the last Parliament. We passed 2 of the 3 bills that are required to have the referendum. The third one is the one that's still waiting to be passed with the question in it. But one of the bills is about the franchise. And we did something very unusual, and very few countries in the world have done what we've done, which we said, if you are legally resident in Scotland, you're entitled to vote. And that's that. It's not dependent upon citizenship. It's simply dependent upon a legal right to stay in Scotland. And the only people who are not covered by that are those whose no decision has yet been made as to whether they have a legal right to stay. So the referendum, those people who get to vote and those people who get to be Scottish citizens will be those who are living in Scotland at the time of independence. And that is the same as was in the White Paper in 2014. It is that residence that people can choose. You're not forced to. You don't have to. If you don't want to become a Scottish citizen, you don't have to become one. But those who are living in Scotland at the time of independence will be entitled to become Scottish citizens. You won't have a total open door thereafter, but Scotland is not full up. We need more people here, and we also need to be true to the tradition that we have of offering a place of safety to refugees and those who are looking for that place of safety. And I think it goes without saying that that is completely opposite to the obscene situation we're seeing south of the border with the immigration bill, and particularly with the proposal essentially to traffic people on behalf of the government to Rwanda. So there will be an opportunity for people who are here, and I think many will take that up. One of the sea changes I think we've seen since 2014 is the desire by EU citizens particularly to have Scottish citizenship and to be part of Scotland. And I think that is quite inspiring, actually, the people I meet who talk about that. But it will be an open policy. It will be a policy that's already enshrined in terms of electoral law, and it will be one that will be fair to all those individuals.
Not particularly on franchise, but in terms of, sort of citizenship, I have a German wife who was extremely annoyed after living in Scotland for nearly 40 years that she had to apply for settled status last year, to otherwise running the risk of getting deported by that nice Home Secretary in London. But I think in terms of population, something that maybe people don't particularly notice or don't realise, but the population of Scotland in 1914, so there's on the outbreak of the First World War, there's 4.9 million, and the population now is just under 5.5 million. Which means Scotland can claim a world record for being the slowest growing or least growth in population of any country on the planet in the last 100 years. So that simply reflects the mass emigration that has taken place, which you see with us in Spain, for example. If I look at my neighbours, I think all except one of the children of the surrounding people has moved to London. Scotland is certainly not full up, and we could do with welcoming, well, for example, some of the 29 million descendants of Scots who live abroad. Maybe we should follow the Irish and invite them to come home.
And you say 2 or 3 things. First of all, this was a debate we had in 2014 a lot, and I think the independence movement did itself enormous advantage. It had a progressive, enlightened attitude by separating 3 things that shouldn't be confused together. First of all, with people who are seeking refuge. I was brought up Catholic. I'm sure there's people who are brought up with religious convictions, and people seeking refuge, your instinct was to widen your hands, open the doors. People who are fleeing from persecution the world over should be welcomed. They should be encouraged to feel safe and welcomed in Scotland, and I'd like to think that's part of, I consider myself to be Scottish, part of our tradition, part of our culture. People seeking asylum and refuge should always be welcome here. Of course, we're entitled to measure We want to make sure that's not abused. But by and large, the default position should be those who are seeking it should have the default position that it would be accepted. We don't want to make sure that the system itself is protected against abuse. Immigration, I'm sure it's the case. People in Grangemouth, my grandparents were Irish immigrants to the west of Scotland. I have family that live in Canada, Australia, South Africa. Tim was saying he's from South Africa. And I think of those people, Mike was talking about his father, was it Mike, in Dunkirk, but I think of how brave, how courageous, how honourable, how, really, really to take the decision to uproot yourself and go to another part of the world in search of a better life when you know nothing about it. That take my hat off to that. And I'm sure that on a human level across the world, everybody does the same. Those people who set off in the Mayflower for Australia, for America, that's a brave thing to do for the human condition. And I believe that was the message that we put out during the referendum campaign in 2014, and does us all credit. Mike, in the course of these remarks again, as he often does, Mike Russell has encouraged us to think pragmatically and maturely. And with that, in the spirit of that, I often reflect on this debate and think that an independent Scotland, I'm sure, will have that attitude to refugees and asylum seekers and the desire to grow Scotland's population. But it's also true, if we bend the stick in the other direction, we also have the right to decide who we don't want to accept. We must have the right in an independent country to say who we don't want to come here. If there were people, for example, there's episodes all over the world, the people trafficking, a criminal fraternity who find it easy to go around the world, etc. I'd like to think that an independent Scotland would make all the distinction in the world from people who are fleeing persecution to somebody who's bringing not the best of intentions and not the best of a record and a history to this country. So I'm bending in that direction, not because there's an equanimity about it, but sometimes that side of our rights to decide our population is sometimes overlooked completely. And I offer that in a pragmatic, mature sense that an independent Scotland also has the right, must also have the right to decide who doesn't want to come here. We don't want, people traffickers. We don't want the drug cartels. We don't want the triads. And we have to have the right to protect us from taking our country in a direction that would be deleterious to our greater advantage. I only raise it here, not because it's equal to what I said before, but often that seems to me is never said, and it seems to me legitimate nonetheless.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to stand up just now. So I want to just say thank you to our three speakers, to Mike, to Colin, to Tim, for coming along tonight to speak to us. Given the time, I will have to just cut it there, but we'll have got the hall for half an hour, so feel free to mingle. And Tim has maps for sale as well as in the shop outside as well. Don't forget that donation bucket for the Grangemouth SNP match. So thank you to our speakers for coming along, and also thank you to you all for coming along this evening as well. It's lovely to see so many of you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. Good.